My fellow Southerners, today we want to take a look at the Zimbabwean political landscape, the state of the opposition and the Chamisa factor. What went wrong with the MDC? What went wrong with the Triple C? Look, no sane person can doubt the popularity of Nelson Chamisa. However, popularity alone is not enough to win state power in Zimbabwe. In fact, I've always maintained that in Zimbabwean politics, there are only three things that matter if you want to be president of Zimbabwe. Only three things. And these are charisma, money, and the gun. Those are the only three things that matter in Zimbabwean politics. It's not about your manifesto. It's not about your policy. You could have the best plan, but Zimbabweans just don't care. If you think I'm lying, go ask Noah Manyika. Go ask Nkosana Moyo. There are only three things that matter if you want to be president of Zimbabwe: charisma, money, and the gun. Charisma gives you the ability to attract crowds, to wow crowds. That's popularity. Popularity gives you national support. You then need money in order to properly organization, administration, and then finally the gun. There is a ZANU-PF saying that goes like, Zimbabwe haina kuyane pen ne paper, yakawuyane gidi. Look, whether we like it or not, the Zimbabwe military establishment is a big stakeholder in Zimbabwean politics. They are the biggest constituency of ZANU-PF and the biggest obstacle to a democratic transition. Remember the words of General Chiwenga during the 2017 coup. He said, "When it comes to defending the gains of our revolution, we won't hesitate to step in. The military won't hesitate to step in. We won't even think twice." Just a few months ago, the current commander of the Zimbabwe National Army, Lieutenant General Sanyatwe, said, ZANU-PF ichatonga kusvika madongi ane nyanga. ZANU-PF will be in power until donkeys grow horns. He wasn't bluffing, you know. But guess what? During the 2017 coup, when they staged that coup, they asked you and me to come and demonstrate in support of their action. They did that because they realized that there is a certain type of power, certain kind of power, certain level of power that only you and me possess. It's called people power. It's best expressed through mass action, demonstrations. And besides war, which I obviously don't encourage, mass action is the only tool, only language that the military establishment will understand, listen to, and respect. Either you do that or you just sit back, relax, and, wait for divine intervention. Are we waiting for divine intervention? Well, fellow Sadzayitas, slay queens and bingers, socialites, papalites, wasinamalites, arukudgarais, newasinamarites. Welcome to the special report. Since the year 2000, Zimbabwe has held 8 different elections. And these are the 2000 parliamentary elections, 2002 presidential elections, March 2005 parliamentary elections, November 2005 senatorial elections, 2008 harmonized elections, 2013 harmonized elections, 2018 harmonized elections, and of course 2023 harmonized elections. Those are the 8 elections held in Zimbabwe since the year 2000. And in those 8 elections, the opposition has only done well in only 2 of them. That's in 2000 and 2008. The rest, which is 6, are comprehensive victories for ZANU-PF. Let that sink in as we ponder on the history of opposition politics in Zimbabwe. A serious opposition politics in Zimbabwe started in the year 2000. Before 2000, the only party that won more than 3 seats in parliament was ZAPU, which got 20 seats in 1980 and 15 seats in 1985. All other parties would always get less than 4 seats. When ZAPU got swallowed by ZANU in 1987 through the Unity Accord, Zimbabwe became a one-party state de facto because ZANU-PF no longer had any notable challenge. In fact, just to make this clearer to you, 3 years after the Unity Accord, Zimbabwe held a general election and ZANU-PF won 117 seats out of 120. 5 years later, in 1995, ZANU-PF got 118 seats out of 120. Mbuya Nyanda's party had no competition at all. But all of this changed when Morgan Tsvangirai and the MDC arrived. ZANU-PF had a rude awakening. Take a look at this photo. This is Morgan Tsvangirai and a young Nelson Chamisa in the early 2000s. No one would have predicted that by 2018, Tsvangirai would be dead and Nelson Chamisa would be the leading candidate for the main opposition. You know, the MDC was only 9 months old when it participated in the June 2000 parliamentary elections. The MDC got 57 seats and ZANU-PF got 62 seats. This was a rude awakening for what ED calls Mbuya Nyanda's party. It became clear to ZANU-PF that business was no longer as usual, and so violence of the Gukura-Wundi kind was unleashed on the MDC. And of course, the Secret Service was working round the clock in its infiltration drive to destroy the opposition from within. In 2005, the MDC split. This split created 2 parties, the MDC-T led by Morgan Tsvangirai and the MDC-M led by Arthur Mtambara. Interestingly, the reason why they split was the decision on whether or not to boycott elections. Tsvangirai's faction wanted to boycott the November 2005 senatorial elections, but Walshman Nube's faction was opposed to this. Tsvangirai's thinking was that participating in elections without the necessary electoral reforms was always going to produce the same result. But Walshman Nube's faction argued that it's better to fight for electoral reforms from inside the system. Isn't this debate still raging today, with some questioning why Nelson Chamisa continues to participate in elections without the necessary electoral reforms? Because a flawed process will always produce a flawed outcome. Participating in a flawed election only serves to legitimize that flawed election. But I have always argued that the biggest problem in Zimbabwe is actually not electoral reforms. The biggest problem is non-compliance by ZANU-PF. Even if you reform the current electoral system, ZANU-PF still won't abide by those reforms. What's the point of creating new laws when ZANU-PF doesn't respect the existing ones? The issue of reforms is an age-old problem in Zimbabwe. A GNU was established in 2008 with the sole purpose of implementing far-reaching reforms agreed to by all parties. The idea was to get rid of this cycle of disputed elections, but sadly, each and every election held after the GNU has been disputed. No meaningful reforms were done during the GNU, mainly because ZANU-PF just wasn't really interested, but partly because the MDC slept on the job. Yes, they did try. At one point, they even disengaged from the GNU, but they really should have done more. And just to show you that they were sleeping on the job, the next elections that were held after the GNU were a total disaster for the opposition. They lost by a landslide. To this day, that remains the biggest defeat the main opposition has ever suffered since the year 2000. This was followed by yet another split of the MDC. BT and Mangoma wanted leadership renewal in the MDC-T, so they started publicly calling for Tsvangirai to step down. In response, Morgan Tsvangirai expelled them and recalled 21 MPs who supported their faction. So you see, recalls did not start in 2023. The only difference is Robert Mugabe did not take sides in the factional battles of the MDC. On the other hand, ED takes sides. The 2013 split forced the MDCT to hold an early congress to fill all vacant positions. This congress was held in 2014. Douglas Munzora beat Nelson Chamisa for the position of Secretary General. Chamisa's loss to Munzora meant that he was now an ordinary card-carrying member. This left him devastated. Remember, Chamisa had been steadily rising through the ranks of the MDC. He started off as the national youth leader in 2000, became national spokesperson in 2006, ICT minister during the inclusive government, and the national organizer in 2011. So, losing the coveted Secretary General post was a bitter pill to swallow for Chamisa. However, he had the last laugh because in 2016, Morgan Tsvangirai amended the MDCT constitution and appointed Chamisa and Mudzuri as vice presidents. This meant that the MDCT now had 3 vice presidents, Kupe, Mudzuri, and Chamisa. Thokozani Kupe was seriously annoyed by this. She even stopped attending party meetings in Harare in protest. She felt that it wasn't fair for her to share the vice presidency with 2 unelected officials, Chamisa and Mudzuri. This was a ticking time bomb, one that would explode after the death of Morgan Tsvangirai. Because when Tsvangirai died, the MDCT split again. You now had 2 factions, one led by Nelson Chamisa and the smaller one led by Thokozani Kupe. They both claimed to be the legitimate leader of the MDCT. This was a product of Tsvangirai's lack of a proper succession plan. He couldn't have left his party in a worse position. Chamisa tried through the courts to stop Thokozani Kupe from using the MDCT name, but he failed. So he went into the 2018 elections under the MDC alliance, and Thokozani Kupe participated under the MDCT. Kupe's party only got 2 seats. Chamisa's MDC alliance got 88 seats. The people had spoken. It seemed the MDCT leadership crisis had seemingly been settled by the electorate. However, by this time, Chamisa no longer cared about the MDCT name. He had adopted the MDC Alliance name as the official party name and proceeded to hold a congress in Gweru. However, months later, the courts nullified Chamisa's Gweru Congress and said that Kupe's party and Chamisa's party remained factions of the MDCT whose leadership had to be settled. The court declared Thokozani Kupe acting president and ordered her to prepare for an extraordinary congress to choose a substantive leader using the 2014 structures. The court also nullified Tsvangirai's 2016 appointment of Chamisa and Mudzuri as vice presidents. However, Nelson Chamisa ignored the ruling, arguing that the MDC alliance was a separate party not affected by MDCT issues. Douglas Munzora, who had been on Chamisa's side since the death of Tsvangirai, welcomed the court's decision, jumped ship and joined Thokozani Kupe in preparing for the extraordinary congress. Kupe started recalling MDC alliance MPs, alleging that they belonged to her party. This despite having contested against them in the previous election. And as Alex Magaisa put it, and here I'm quoting him verbatim, he said, "It means she is at present leader of 2 rival political parties that contested each other in the last election and are separately represented in parliament. This position allows her to move seamlessly from one party to another and to cherry pick on whom to keep and whom to recall. Unsurprisingly, she has chosen to recall her opponents who defeated her in the last election." Those are the words of Dr. Alex Magaisa. May his soul rest in peace. Anyway, The recalls continued even after Douglas Monzora had taken over the MDCT from Kupe after the Extraordinary Congress, which he won scandalously. Monzora took over Harvest House, which the MDC Alliance had been using since the death of Morgan Tsvangirai. After taking Harvest House, he started saying that Chamisa can't use the MDC Alliance name, claiming it belongs to the MDCT. He even threatened legal action. The MDC Alliance leadership then met to discuss the issue of the MDC Alliance name, especially given the fact that the party was about to participate in the March 2022 by-elections. They didn't want a situation where they go into the elections as MDC Alliance and risk their MPs getting recalled by Douglas Monzora again. This is what led to the formation of the CCC in 2022. But 2 years later, Chamisa resigned, stating that the CCC had been infiltrated beyond redemption. And so, after almost 1 year missing in action, Chamisa is back and is promising to launch yet another political party. For now, he is calling it The New. The good thing for him is that at last he gets to create a political party on his own terms. Finally, this will actually be his own project, his actual brainchild. The MDC Alliance was not on his own terms. Equally, the CCC was also not on his own terms. In fact, this is what in part destroyed the CCC, because his new strategies in the CCC caused friction. The party leadership, as elected in Gweru, resisted Chamisa's new approach to politics. They hated his leadership style and strategy, particularly his doctrine of strategic ambiguity. This strategy involved keeping the party structure and hierarchy deliberately vague, deliberately unclear. In fact, the fancy word for that is amorphous. He wanted to make it difficult for the enemy to infiltrate the CCC or target specific individuals within the CCC leadership. After all, you can't destroy what you don't know. However, for this strategy to work effectively, it meant that most power had to be vested in the office of the president, aka Chamisa. Most, if not all, major functions of the party had to run through the office of the president. Even the constitution which Chamisa presented in court during the Chabangu fiasco was centered around the president. Now, given all that, you can understand why the old guard started acting up. They felt left out. But some didn't speak up. They kept their mouths shut. They calculated. They thought, well, in the event that Nelson Chamisa wins the presidency, we want positions. So they thought, well, it's best to keep our mouths shut. But secretly, they were working with the Chabang opportunists. Now, a lot has been said about Chamisa's strategic ambiguity, and I must say, his critics make a very good argument. You see, by allowing Nelson Chamisa to enjoy so much power, you are taking a very big gamble. You are assuming that Chamisa will always be good and that he will never abuse that power. How do you know that when he becomes a state president, he will open up the party and let it function normally? The truth is, you don't know. You are taking a gamble. Now, let's assume that Chamisa will always be good. But what happens if, say, he dies and is replaced by a power-hungry, self-serving dictator? What then will happen to the party? Because that new leader will have found a perfect environment to exercise his dictatorship. Strategic ambiguity was never going to work as long as the MDC old guard was in the CCC, because they felt left out. That is what caused the friction, and ZANU-PF took advantage of that friction, exploited that friction. That explains the Chabang recalls. Now, there are those who say the CCC lost elections because it had no structures. Nothing could be further from the truth. People People forget that 2023 was the best performance by the main opposition since 2008. Let that sink in. In fact, let me repeat it. I said 2023 was the best performance by the main opposition since 2008. In 2013, the main opposition under Morgan Tsvangirai suffered its worst defeat in history, yet it had structures. That means Nelson Chamisa inherited a very weak opposition and grew its parliamentary base both in 2018 and 2023 incrementally. Like I said in my intro, the MDC under Morgan Tsvangirai only did well in 2 elections, that is 2000 and 2008. The rest were comprehensive defeats, yet the MDC had structures. This is not South Africa. It's not Botswana, it's not Zambia, it's not Malawi. This is Zimbabwe. The Zimbabwean political terrain is different. It's definitely not about structures. It's about strategy, it's about action. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying structures are not important. No, they are. Very. But their presence doesn't guarantee success. If they did, then Morgan Tsvangirai would have become president in 2008. I told you, there are only 3 things that matter in Zimbabwean politics if you wanna win state power. 3 things: charisma, money, and the gun. And as Nelson Chamisa prepares to launch another political vehicle, I ask, is he thinking about these 3 things? Or is he just waiting for divine intervention? Is God really in it? I'm not saying he's not, and I'm also not saying he is. I am simply asking the question. As always, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content, please like and share.